Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a mountain of information articles, research, historical archives, and drill down through the cultural and geographical layers to hand you the pure, distilled essence. Today, we are focusing on a place that is, I think it's fair to say, consistently one of the most misunderstood and complex states in the Union, New Mexico.
That's putting it mildly. It's misunderstood on a really fundamental level.
Right. I mean, when you dig into the source material, it's clear the state has been fighting this identity crisis that's almost laughable, but it's entirely real. The constant confusion that it is not, in fact, the country of Mexico.
It's not just an occasional mistake either. This is a systemic, long-running issue. You mentioned the New Mexico magazine. They've run a recurring feature for years called One of Our 50 is Missing.
I love that feature. It details all the mail sent to foreign countries or the times New Mexico residents were asked for their passports at the airport.
It's a perennial problem, but one that really highlights the state's deep, non-Anglo roots. It's so common, in fact, that New Mexico is the only state that specifies USA right there on its license plates.
Just to be clear.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic solution to a constant geographical and political confusion. But, when you move past the jokes, the state's official nickname, the Land of Enchantment, and its state motto, Crescit Undu.
Which means it grows as it goes.
Yeah, poetically, it grows as it goes. I think those two phrases capture the true spirit of its resilience and its incredibly deep history.
So our mission today is to unpack all the incredible sources we have detailing New Mexico's history, its surprising environmental and demographic diversity, and its unique world-changing role in American science and identity. We're going to try to move far beyond the simplistic images of chili peppers and arid desert landscapes to really understand the intricate layering of sovereignty and culture that makes this place so unique.
And I think to set the stage, we absolutely have to start at the historical and geographical epicenter, Santa Fe. It holds the distinction of being the oldest state capital in the United States, founded way, way back in 1610 as the government seat of the Spanish province of Nuevo Mexico.
1610. That's a decade before the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. That really puts things in perspective.
It does. And what's equally dramatic is its physical location. At 6,998 feet above sea level, it is also the highest state capital in the U.S.
That elevation contrast, that sense of being both ancient and physically dominant, is actually a perfect synthesis of the state itself, isn't it? Our sources show the scale is just massive. New Mexico is the fifth largest state by area in the U.S. I mean, just think about how physically vast that is.
Huge.
But then you look at the population, and it ranks only 36th. Which makes it 45th in population density. It is quite literally huge and sparse.
It is, and that combination of vastness and sparsity creates really the ideal setting for its demographic situation, which I think is our first real hook into the state's complex identity.
And what is that hook?
New Mexico is one of only 7 majority-minority states in the country. And crucially, it boasts the highest percentage of Hispanic and Latino populations nationally, at nearly 48%, and the second highest percentage of Native American populations right after Alaska. That deep layering of original Pueblo, then subsequent Spanish, and then eventual American cultures, that defines everything we are about to discuss.
Okay, so let's unpack this land itself. When we talk about New Mexico's size, we really need to place it geographically. It's landlocked, and famously, it shares the Four Corners region.
Right, that unique geographical spot in the Northwest where it meets Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. It's the only place in the country where 4 states intersect like that. A perfect right angle.
A cartographer's dream.
Exactly. And of course, to the south, it shares a lengthy international border with Mexico, extending nearly 180 miles. It specifically borders the Mexican states of Sonora and Chihuahua.
And it's mostly Chihuahua.
That's a key detail. Chihuahua actually makes up the vast majority, about 90% of that entire international stretch.
The state also has a few geographic oddities that are tied directly to its history. There's that southwestern area known as the Boot Heel.
Ah, yes, the Boot Heel, a very distinct rectangular piece of land.
And it wasn't just a random line on a map. It was acquired through the Gadsden Purchase in 1853. And that purchase wasn't just about grabbing land, it was strategic, wasn't it?
Entirely. It was specifically designed to secure a viable right-of-way for a future transcontinental railroad, bypassing the extremely rugged mountain terrain farther north. This little detail shows you how transportation and commerce literally drove the final shape of the territory.
What's fascinating to me here is how often New Mexico is superficially depicted as just an arid, homogeneous desert. I mean, that's the stereotype.
That narrative is fundamentally misleading. The geography is incredibly varied. It just completely defies that simple stereotype.
In what way?
Well, our sources consistently show that close to a third of the state is actually covered in timberland and heavily forested mountain wildernesses dominated by the Rockies in the north.
A third. That's
Yeah.
huge.
It is. And furthermore, over 4/5 of the state sits higher than 4,000 feet above sea level. This is absolutely one of the high mountain plateau states. It's not a low-lying desert.
So it's not just desert. It's this high-altitude mix of mountains, plains, and valleys. So what are the major physiographic regions we should focus on to really understand this diversity?
You can really break it down into 4 distinct provinces. The rugged and dramatic north is dominated by the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. These are the southernmost stretch of the mighty Rocky Mountains.
And they get pretty high up there.
Oh, yeah. They reach elevations over 13,000 feet, which supports significant winter sports and, more importantly, acts as a massive watershed. Then moving east, the Great Plains extend into the state, notably forming the Llano Estacado.
The Staked Plain. That's such an evocative name. Where does it come from?
It's believed to come from the idea that early Spanish travelers needed to place stakes in the ground to find their way across the vast, dry, featureless expanse.
So they wouldn't get lost.
Exactly. It speaks to the sheer disorienting scale of that landscape. Then you have the Colorado Plateau occupying the northwestern quadrant, which is characterized by unique volcanic formations, dramatic mesas, and pinyon juniper woodlands.
Yeah.
Classic Western movie territory.
Right, and the fourth region.
And finally, in the south, you have the massive Chihuahuan Desert. It's the largest desert in North America, stretching deep into Mexico and defining the climate of the southern half of the state.
So given this really varied landscape and the generally arid conditions, the water systems must be pivotal. I mean, without a reliable water source, none of the historical or modern settlement patterns make any sense at all.
Absolutely pivotal. The single most important geographical feature, historically, ecologically, and politically, is the Rio Grande.
Of course.
It runs dramatically from north to south, cutting a fertile valley almost right through the state center. It's tied for the 4th longest river in the entire U.S., and its fertile riparian valley is what created the bosque habitat.
A bosque being a kind of forest.
A very specific kind. It's a cottonwood and willow forest, and that's what has supported human habitation since prehistoric times. It's why settlers, both Puebloan and Spanish, concentrated their populations right along its length.
And the scarcity of water means that the Rio Grande isn't just an ecological feature, it's a political one, right? I mean, there must be constant fights over it.
It creates perpetual tension. The sources we looked at really highlight that New Mexico sits at the nexus of interstate and international water compacts. For decades, it has been in legal battles with states downstream, particularly Texas, over water allocations.
Stemming from old agreements.
Agreements signed over a century ago. This struggle emphasizes that water rights are not just about farming. They are about sovereignty, political power, and frankly, survival in the arid West.
What other major river systems are at play here? It's not just the Rio Grande.
No, there are 4 others that define the regional watersheds. The Pecos River flows roughly parallel to the Rio Grande to the east, feeding its own unique ecosystems. The Canadian River rises in the mountains and flows eastward across the Great Plains, eventually draining into the Mississippi system.
And to the west.
West of the Continental Divide, we find the San Juan River in the northwest and the Gila River in the southwest. But it's a sobering reminder that with the exception of the Gila, all these major rivers are heavily dammed to provide crucial irrigation and flood control. It just underscores the relentless human modification required for settlement here.
That constant push and pull between water availability and arid land must also lead to some dramatic climate swings, which just reinforces this land of contrasts theme.
It certainly does. While the overall climate is classified as semi-arid to arid, tempered by alpine climates at the highest elevations, the temperature range is just extreme.
How extreme are we talking?
Well, the mean minimum temperature statewide in January sits around 21.7 degrees Fahrenheit, but average high temperatures in July at lower desert elevations can easily push up to 99 degrees.
That is a huge seasonal swing. But the historical extremes I saw in sources are just shocking. The record low for the state is a brutal minus 57 degrees Fahrenheit.
Minus 57. And the record high is 122. You're dealing with Almost 180 degrees of variability across the state, from alpine tundra to scorching desert. It's incredible.
The climate, however, provides a critical modern advantage, doesn't it?
It does. The dry, temperate nature, combined with the sparse population and minimal development, translates directly into exceptionally clear skies and extremely low light pollution.
And that connects directly to the state's cutting-edge scientific identity.
Precisely. This environmental characteristic makes New Mexico a global hub for major astronomical research. You see this reflected in sites like the famous Very Large Array, or VLA, near Socorro.
That's the one with all the huge satellite dishes in a Y shape.
The massive complex of 27 radio telescopes. And you also have the Apache Point Observatory. This is a perfect case where the physical geography literally dictated a high-tech future for the state.
Let's pivot to the conservation legacy. Given that New Mexico is the fifth largest state, how much of this unique, varied land is actually protected or owned by the federal government?
A very substantial amount. Roughly 1/3 of all New Mexico land, we're talking 24.7 million out of 77.8 million acres, is federally owned.
A third. So where does that put it nationally?
It makes it the 10th highest percentage in the country for federal land ownership. And it's managed primarily by agencies like the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service.
I found a detail here about conservation history that is just globally significant. It blew my mind.
You must be referring to the Gila Wilderness.
Yes.
This area, located in the southwestern corner of the state, was designated as the world's first official wilderness area way back in 1924. This was largely thanks to the incredible work of conservationist Aldo Leopold.
So New Mexico is the blueprint.
It was the blueprint. This designation cemented New Mexico's central pioneering role in the early 20th century conservation movement. It established the standard for wilderness protection across the entire globe.
And beyond that single pioneering site, the state is a national leader in protected areas in general.
It truly is. New Mexico hosts 9 national monuments, which is second only to Arizona in sheer number. This includes El Morro, which was the second oldest monument designated in the country, established by Teddy Roosevelt in 1906.
But the most impressive statistic, which I think highlights its rich heritage of both natural and human history, is the UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Yes, New Mexico has 3 UNESCO World Heritage Sites wholly contained within the state. That's more than any other single U.S. state.
3 contained sites is highly unusual.
Mm-hmm.
What are they, and what do they represent about the state's identity?
They perfectly encapsulate its identity. First, you have Chaco Culture National Historical Park, which showcases the monumental structures and engineering of the ancestral Pueblones. Mind-boggling stuff.
Yeah.
Second, Taos Pueblo, which is recognized as a living Native American community continuously inhabited for over 1,000 years. It's not a ruin, it's a home.
A living World Heritage Site.
Exactly. And third, Carlsbad Caverns National Park, highlighting the dramatic geology of the Chihuahuan Desert region. That cluster ancient architecture, living culture, and dramatic geology that really solidifies New Mexico's claim as the land of enchantment.
Building on that rich heritage, let's jump back in time, because the history of New Mexico is absolutely defined by those layers of sovereignty we mentioned: indigenous, Spanish, Mexican, and finally, American. Let's start with the name itself. The sources clarify that the etymology of Nuevo Mexico is often confused with the country that gained independence much later.
That's right. It's a fundamental misconception that trips people up all the time. The name Nuevo Mexico was established in 1581 during the Chamuscado and Rodriguez expedition.
Which was decades before the country of Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821.
Exactly. It's a classic case of history preceding geopolitics. The name came first.
So the Spanish didn't name it after a future country. They named it after something much older, really an idea of a new conquest.
Precisely. The name derives from the Spanish conquest of the powerful Aztec Empire in the early 16th century. The Spanish conquistadors, driven by, insatiable ambition and often fantastical rumors, were hoping to find equally wealthy indigenous cultures farther north.
The 7 cities of gold.
The mythic 7 cities of gold. They called this supposed northern empire Yanquic Mexico, which literally translates from a mix of Nahuatl and Spanish to a new Mexico. When the legendary riches failed to materialize, the area was still colonized, and the name, referring to that hopeful new land of opportunity, just stuck.
Moving back even further, the land was populated long, long before any European explorers arrived. What are the earliest markers of human life we have?
Well, the initial human presence is usually traced back to the Clovis culture of Paleo Indians. But here's an incredible fact from our sources that just reshapes the entire timeline of human presence in the Americas. Footprints discovered in 2017 at White Sands suggest that humans may have been present in the region as far back as 21,000 to 23,000 BC.
23,000 BC. That's right in the middle of the last ice age.
It is. It pushes the timeline back thousands of years. Later, of course, the sophisticated ancestral Puebloans and the Mogollon culture emerged, leaving behind these advanced settlements, including the monumental structures and complex road systems found at Chaco Canyon.
And it was the legend of this highly sophisticated, unseen northern empire that spurred the Spanish exploration in the first place, leading men like Coronado on that famous and ultimately fruitless search.
Exactly. When Spanish colonial rule was officially cemented, Pedro Peralta established Santa Fe as a permanent capital in 1610, making it the seat of government for the vast northern territory of New Spain. But Spanish control wasn't absolute. Far from it.
You're talking about the Pueblo Revolt.
The Pueblo Revolt in 1680. It was a powerful, successful indigenous uprising that famously drove the Spanish completely out of the area for over a decade. It's one of the most significant, successful indigenous rebellions in North American history.
That moment, the successful pushback, is so crucial because when the Spanish did eventually return, the whole dynamic had shifted, hadn't it?
It's absolutely key to the state's cultural synthesis. Following the death of the Pueblo leader Pope, Diego de Vargas restored Spanish rule in 1692. But this return came with a much greater understanding and acceptance of cultural and religious liberties for the Pueblo people.
So it wasn't a simple reconquest.
No, it was a negotiation. This remote region, so far from the central control of Mexico City, fostered a degree of pragmatic cooperation and cultural melding between the Pueblo peoples and the colonists that you just didn't see in many other parts of New Spain.
This colonial lifestyle seems to have been highly dependent on communal engineering and social cooperation, all necessitated by the scarcity of water.
It was entirely dependent on sophisticated water management, much of which was inherited from indigenous practices. Spanish land grants encouraged settlement, but due to chronic water scarcity, the population, about 25,000 non-indigenous settlers by 1800, concentrated almost exclusively along that narrow, fertile strip of the Rio Grande Valley.
And they lived in these communal, walled adobe settlements.
Right, and they relied entirely on acequias.
The acequias are so much more than just irrigation ditches, though. They represent an entire system of political and social organization, don't they?
They do. They are community-owned and operated irrigation canals, and they define the state's water law even today. Their governance is incredibly democratic and traditional.
How did that work?
Local officials, known as mayordomos, are elected annually to oversee the cleaning, the maintenance, and, most importantly, the water allocation based on historical seniority. This system of communal reliance on water predates American law and is a living legacy that still influences property rights disputes today.
Okay, let's fast forward to the turbulent 19th century. New Mexico shifted from a Spanish colony to a Mexican territory.
Yes, in 1821, New Mexico became part of the First Mexican Empire when Mexico gained its independence from Spain. This immediately led to external conflict when the recently formed Republic of Texas claimed all the land east of the Rio Grande.
Which triggered the failed Texan Santa Fe expedition.
Exactly. Internally, this era saw New Mexico increase its economic reliance northward toward the burgeoning U.S. via the famed Santa Fe Trail, bringing in American goods and, critically, American influence.
And inevitably, after the Mexican-American War, that economic reliance turned into full-blown U.S. annexation.
Mexico ceded its northern territories to the U.S. in 1848 through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which included New Mexico. The transition was immediately met with hostility.
Because of the harsh treatment from the American military.
Right, which culminated in the Taos Revolt in 1847. Despite this conflict, the U.S. military eventually appointed a local governor and vowed to respect the land rights of the Nuevo Mexicanos and grant them citizenship. That promise was often symbolized by the Lincoln Canes, which were gifted to the Pueblo leaders, recognizing their sovereign status within the new territory.
Then the Civil War hit, even in this remote territory. We often think of the Civil War as an Eastern theater conflict, but how critical was the New Mexico territory strategically?
It was strategically vital, particularly to the Confederacy. Their goal was to seize control of the gold fields of California and the ports of the Pacific. It was an ambitious Western strategy.
So they needed New Mexico as a corridor.
Precisely. Both the Union and Confederacy claimed the territory. Confederate forces briefly occupied parts of the South, but their power was effectively broken following the Union victory at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in 1862.
That battle is often called the Gettysburg of the West.
A fitting name. It permanently secured the Southwest for the Union and prevented the Confederacy from accessing the gold and ports it so desperately needed to fund its war effort.
So post-Civil War, the arrival of Anglo-Americans, which the sources note included African Americans and European immigrants following the military and the railroads, intensified. And this led directly into the brutal American Indian Wars.
This is a very dark period in the state's history. Brigadier General James Carleton and the famed frontiersman Kit Carson implemented a scorched earth policy aimed at forcing hostile tribes onto reservations.
Powerful groups like the Navajo were subdued during the Long Walk, which was just a brutal forced relocation.
A horrific chapter. And the Apache were similarly confined to barren, remote reservations, changing the political and geographical landscape permanently. These actions left a lasting, deep scar on the relationship between the federal government and the indigenous population.
And yet, despite the territory having sufficient population and organization, New Mexico was delayed. It wasn't until January 6, 1912, that it finally became the 47th state. 60 years of eligibility were just wasted. Why the extraordinary delay?
The sources are overwhelmingly clear on this. The primary reason for the delay was deep-seated prejudice and political resistance from the established American political class, mostly in the East.
And what was the prejudice based on?
They perceived New Mexico's majority Hispanic, Spanish-speaking Catholic population as alien to U.S. culture and political values. There were real, documented concerns that the population was illiterate, that they couldn't govern themselves democratically, and would be politically motivated.
So it was essentially a refusal to grant statehood to a large, non-white, non-English-speaking population.
Exactly. It speaks volumes about the early 20th century anxiety over the racial and cultural composition of the Union. When statehood was finally granted, it was only after significant effort was made to prove loyalty, including the territory passing laws, mandating English education, and showing robust support for the federal government.
But when New Mexico finally entered the Union, they went all in on showing that loyalty, didn't they? Particularly in the World Wars.
They did. New Mexicans volunteered in huge numbers during both World Wars, often serving in segregated units. The state suffered more casualties per capita than any other state in World War II.
Wow.
It's a fact residents take immense pride in as proof of their patriotism, and that war effort was the single greatest catalyst for the state's entrance into the modern scientific age.
And here's where the state's identity pivots so sharply, and where we start to see that internal paradox emerge, the atomic age.
This is the moment. New Mexico was chosen to host the most secret, world-changing scientific endeavor in human history, the Manhattan Project. Key facilities included Los Alamos National Laboratory and Sandia National Laboratories.
And it was also the site of the first nuclear test, Trinity, in 1945.
Right. This established a massive, lasting federal and military presence. White Sands Missile Range, Kirtland Air Force Base, which translated into a sudden, immense influx of federal spending and highly skilled personnel. It created this massive intellectual and economic corridor right alongside the rural, traditional economies.
That high military presence wasn't always smooth, though. There were incidents.
Far from it. The legacy of these sites is complex and includes some terrifying accidents. On May 22, 1957, a B-36 accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb near Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque.
It dropped a nuclear bomb.
It did. Thankfully, only its conventional explosive trigger detonated, scattering radioactive material but not causing a full nuclear yield. But the proximity of such an incident to a major city highlighted the inherent risks of having the atomic age concentrated in one area.
I also want to circle back briefly to post-war civil rights, because despite that immense wartime patriotism, discrimination absolutely persisted.
It did. Even after fighting for the U.S. overseas, Jim Crow laws were unfortunately enacted against Hispanos and indigenous affiliated individuals. The landmark case here is the 1948 ruling won by veteran Miguel Trujillo Sr. of Ailete Pueblo.
What did he accomplish?
Trujillo successfully challenged state laws that had previously prohibited Native Americans living on reservations from voting if they were exempt from paying state taxes. His victory overturned those discriminatory state provisions and significantly expanded voting rights across the state.
Now we shift gears to the modern economy. Because New Mexico is not just sand and history. It is a high-tech frontier fueled by that federal legacy. The state's total GDP was over $105 billion in 2023. So what are the key economic drivers today, and how do they relate to that internal paradox we started sensing?
The economy is heavily diversified now, shifting away from its traditional reliance on, say, ranching and resource extraction, though oil and gas remain massive sectors.
Especially in the Permian Basin.
Absolutely, particularly in the Permian Basin region of the Southeast. But the major modern sectors include aerospace, media, and film. And that federal presence established during the Manhattan Project still translates into an extraordinary concentration of scientists and engineers. Los Alamos County, for example, is consistently ranked as one of the most highly educated counties in the U.S., measured by the percentage of residents holding PhDs.
And that's the paradox right there. One county packed with PhDs and federal salary money, existing right alongside some of the poorest, most rural economies in the entire country. It's almost two different states coexisting within the same borders.
That's the clearest way to describe the economic reality. The science corridor along the Rio Grande Valley is vastly different from the agricultural plains or the Native American reservations. However, historically, the land has always served as a critical transportation corridor, which helped pull these disparate regions together.
Let's track those ancient and historical roads.
Well, trade and migration define its history. Pre-Columbian trade routes eventually gave way to the Spanish colonial route, El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro.
The royal road of the interior land.
Right. And this was one of the four crucial royal roads of New Spain, stretching over 1,500 miles from Mexico City all the way to Santa Fe. It was arguably the longest continuously used road in North America for centuries. Then came the Santa Fe Trail, which was crucial for later U.S. westward expansion and commerce.
These routes set the stage for the dramatic rail boom of the late 19th century, didn't they?
Oh, completely. The construction of the Southern Pacific and the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, the ATSF railroads, prompted a massive population boom, commercial development, and ushered in the era of tourism. The ATSF in particular was brilliant at marketing the exotic Southwest. They heavily promoted Native American imagery to attract travelers from the East.
And their famous Super Chief train became a legend.
A legend for its luxury, its speed, and its exoticness. The cars were named after regional tribes and decorated with local art, and it cut the trip from Chicago to Los Angeles to under 40 hours, which was revolutionary at the time.
Rail gave way to the automobile, but New Mexico still faces modern transportation challenges, mainly due to its sparse population and just massive terrain.
Indeed. It has one of the most minimal interstate systems in the U.S. It's tied for the fewest primary routes, with only I-10 running east-west across the south,
I-25 running north-south through the center.
and I-40 running east-west across the north. In Albuquerque, I-25 and I-40 meet at the massive famous Big I interchange.
And running parallel to I-40 is the ghost of U.S. Route 66.
U.S. Route 66, the nation's mother road. It was absolutely critical for migrants and commerce, especially for those fleeing west during the Dust Bowl in World War II. It was replaced mostly by I-40. But here's a quirky but important piece of transportation history. New Mexico was home to U.S. Route 666.
The Devil's Highway. The naming alone sounds like it caused problems. What's the story there?
The name itself, combined with the fact that it ran through some incredibly remote and sparsely policed areas, became steeped in superstition. It also had a consistently high fatality rate.
So it was a dangerous road with a scary name.
A bad combination. Due to a combination of crashes, the numerical designation, and requests from various religious and civic groups, the route was ultimately decommissioned and renamed U.S. Route 491 in 2003. It's a great example of how culture and superstition can actually influence infrastructure policy.
But regardless of the road name, the sources we looked at highlight that poor physical infrastructure remains a really serious problem in the state.
That's a major point. Despite the state's wealth in oil and gas production, a 2022 report cited poor road conditions, which stem from a chronic lack of state and local funding, as a major factor contributing to the state's continually high traffic fatalities.
It's just too big and empty to pave effectively.
The sheer size of the state and the amount of federally owned, untaxable land make maintaining the infrastructure an enormous financial burden. Between 2015 and 2019 alone, nearly 1,900 people were killed in automotive crashes in New Mexico.
But in complete contrast to its struggling road infrastructure, New Mexico is literally looking far above the road into space.
Here is where the high-tech frontier really comes to life, a direct descendant of that Manhattan Project legacy. New Mexico hosts Spaceport America, located near the town of Truth or Consequences.
Great name.
isn't it? And what makes the spaceport unique is that it is the world's first operational, purpose-built commercial spaceport. It was designed from the ground up for private companies, not government launches.
That sounds like something out of a futuristic novel, but it's entirely real and functional, proving New Mexico's commitment to the next phase of science and exploration.
It is, and it's already achieved major milestones. In 2021, New Mexico became only the third U.S. state, after California and Florida, to launch humans into space. That was via Virgin Galactic's VSS Unity flights. This facility is also crucial for testing new aerospace technology, like Spin Launch's suborbital accelerator technology, which aims to provide a far more economical and fuel-efficient satellite launch alternative to traditional rockets. This facility represents a massive investment in the future of the state's economy.
And in New Mexico's deep involvement in high tech predates the spaceport by decades, stretching all the way back to the dawn of the computing age.
Much earlier, Albuquerque was the founding location of microinstrumentation and telemetry systems, or MITs. They built the Altair 8800 microcomputer in 1974.
And that's the machine that captivated the imagination of two young programmers, who then moved to Albuquerque to write software for it.
Bill Gates and Paul Allen. That company's work led directly to the founding of Microsoft in Albuquerque. Today, the state continues to host major tech giants like Intel, with its massive F11X facility in Rio Rancho, and HP Inc., just reinforcing that image of a state split between ancient culture and cutting-edge science.
We've covered the land, the history, and the economy. Now let's look at how these elements fuse together to create a distinct New Mexican identity, starting with the people themselves and that crucial demographic structure.
As we mentioned at the top, the demographic situation is just crucial to understanding anything about the state. 47.7% Hispanic or Latino and 10.0% Native American. It's one of the most demographically diverse states in the nation. And the sources highlight a crucial distinction within the Latino community that is central to the state's internal politics and history: the difference between Hispanos and Mexican Americans.
This is a really nuanced point that often gets lost outside the Southwest. Can you explain that distinction for the listener?
Sure. Hispanos, or Nuevo Mexicanos, are typically descendants of the Spanish colonial settlers who established communities in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Their roots predate the American and Mexican national borders by centuries.
And they're concentrated mostly in the northern part of the state.
Right, particularly along the Rio Grande corridor and in the mountains. And interestingly, some in this group claim crypto-Jewish ancestry through descendants of conversos, Jews who were forced to convert during the Inquisition among those early colonists. It's a legacy that's still being explored today.
And Mexican Americans.
Mexican Americans, by contrast, are generally defined as more recent arrivals, migrating during and after the Mexican War era, and they reside mostly in the South, though, of course, this is a generalization.
And that long isolation that defined the colonial period actually created a unique linguistic artifact: New Mexican Spanish.
Exactly. This is a unique dialect, insulated for centuries from the evolution of Standard Spanish in both Mexico and Spain. It preserves older elements, like forms of 17th century Castilian that you just don't hear anymore globally.
And it borrows words, too.
It does. It incorporated numerous Native American words for local features, plants, animals, places, and later adopted anglicized words to express modern concepts as American influence grew. However, while the heritage is strong, the sources do show a decline in native speakers, with less than 4% of the population speaking Navajo at home, and the traditional New Mexican Spanish dialect also facing attrition.
What is the official language status? Is New Mexico truly a bilingual state in a legal sense?
This is a highly nuanced legal issue, and it's rooted in that resistance to statehood we talked about. The state constitution does not declare any language official.
That's surprising.
It is. But the historical and constitutional requirements are strong. For 40 years post-statehood, the Constitution mandated that all laws and legislative journals be published in both English and Spanish to ensure the rights of the Spanish-speaking majority were protected. Today, bilingual ballots are constitutionally required for referendums on constitutional amendments, and the state has a constitutional obligation to provide bilingual education where students are primarily Hispanophone. This is an explicit legacy of that struggle for political integration.
Let's turn to the culture that visually defines the state, starting with the architecture. It's so immediately recognizable.
The architecture is a beautiful, deeply rooted fusion. It merges the ancient, organic, indigenous Pueblo architecture, which is characterized by those earth-colored adobe materials, flat roofs, and exposed wooden beams called vigas, with Spanish colonial influences, like enclosed courtyards and wooden detailing.
And this gave rise to the distinct Pueblo revival and territorial styles that you see everywhere in cities like Santa Fe.
Exactly. A famous example is the Chemo Theater in Albuquerque, built in the dramatic Pueblo Deco style in the 1920s. It blends indigenous motifs with Art Deco geometry. It's stunning.
Santa Fe has such a massive reputation as a global art center. What makes it such a magnet for artists and creativity, attracting figures like Georgia O'Keeffe?
It hosts a thriving artistic community built upon that deep cultural foundation. Santa Fe hosts the annual Santa Fe Indian Market, which is recognized globally as the oldest and largest juried Native American art showcase. It's a huge event.
And Albuquerque complements this with its own institutions.
Right. Albuquerque hosts the National Hispanic Cultural Center, which is dedicated to preserving and promoting Hispanic culture, and perhaps most famously, the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta, the largest hot air balloon festival in the world.
The performing arts side of the Spanish heritage is also incredibly strong.
It absolutely is, especially in classical Spanish traditions. Old Spanish traditions like zarzuelas, which are a kind of light operetta, and flamenco, are incredibly popular and fiercely protected. The University of New Mexico is particularly noted for having the only dedicated degree program in flamenco in the world outside of Spain.
The only one.
The only one. And Albuquerque hosts the festival Flamenco International, which is recognized as the largest and oldest flamenco event outside of Spain.
And of course, the state is immortalized in film and literature, both historical and modern. The Western genre, basically.
New Mexico is the origin of so many famed Western folklore figures, from Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett to El Fuego Baca. It's where the Wild West truly intersected with Spanish law and culture. In modern media, it's a powerhouse. The state's generous financial incentives and highly diverse geography, from snowy mountains to vast deserts, have made it ideal for production.
Most notably, the entire Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul franchise, which was set and filmed entirely in Albuquerque.
Right, supported by Albuquerque Studios and the presence of giants like Netflix and NBC Universal, it's a major economic driver.
Finally, we have to talk about the unique cuisine. You cannot have a deep dive into New Mexico without addressing New Mexican cuisine. It's so distinct from Tex-Mex or standard Mexican food.
This is the definitive cultural marker. And the absolute key, the heart of it all, is the New Mexico chili pepper, specifically the varieties grown in the Hatch Valley. The fundamental question every visitor must answer is the culinary identity statement, red or green.
Referring to the color of the chili sauce they want on their food.
Exactly, and this cuisine is a true fusion of indigenous dishes and Spanish Hispano flavors, emphasizing local ingredients. Iconic dishes include sopapillas,
A light, airy, fry bread-style pastry often served with honey. Delicious.
enchilada montada, where the tortillas are stacked flat, not rolled, green chili stew, and bizcochitos, the state cookie, which is flavored with anise and cinnamon.
Let's turn to the state's political identity, which is arguably the biggest surprise given its history of delayed statehood and its unique cultural makeup.
New Mexico is now generally considered a Democratic stronghold in national elections, but historically, it was a major swing state, and its underlying political culture remains strongly moderate.
That's a key point.
A substantial 36% of New Mexicans identify as political moderates. This means that individual candidate profile, local outreach, and specific issue stances often matter a lot more than rigid national party ideology.
And they have a truly unusual government structure at the state level that contributes to this decentralized feeling.
They operate with a citizen legislature. Lawmakers are essentially volunteers who receive only a modest daily stipend while they're in session. This highly unusual tradition dates back to statehood.
And what was the principle behind that?
It was founded on the principle that the legislature should be composed of citizens temporarily leaving their normal lives, not career politicians.
What impact does that citizen legislature status have on governance today?
It means the legislative session is relatively short, only 60 days in odd years and 30 days in even years. It also means lawmakers rely very heavily on professional staff and outside expert testimony. This often slaves down the legislative process and forces compromise, which further emphasizes the state's moderate temperament, where radical shifts in policy are difficult to achieve quickly.
Yet, despite this unique, sometimes slow structure, they are leaders nationally in representation, particularly for women of color.
Absolutely. New Mexico has elected more women of color to public office than any other state. Our sources show that 2/3 of all non-white women who have ever been elected governor in the entire U.S. are from New Mexico.
2/3. That's an incredible statistic.
It is. And this legacy of inclusion and representation goes back a century, starting with Soledad Chavez Chacon, who became the first Hispanic woman elected to statewide office in the U.S. way back in 1922 as Secretary of State.
Okay, let's review some of the unique policy and lawmaking choices that reflect this moderate independent streak, which can be progressive on some fronts and then deeply conservative on others.
The laws are fascinatingly disparate. On one hand, the state is highly progressive on certain social issues. It abolished the death penalty in 2009.
Okay.
It has also pioneered permissive cannabis laws, legalizing medical use in 2007, recreational use in 2021, and it was the first state to decriminalize drug paraphernalia back in 2019. Furthermore, regarding abortion access, New Mexico is among the most permissive in the nation, with procedures legal at all stages. The governor even issued an executive order protecting providers from out-of-state litigation after the Dobbs decision.
But then you have the complete opposite approach to firearms. It's a total reversal.
That is the ultimate expression of New Mexico's political moderation and its strong sense of frontier individualism. The New Mexico Constitution explicitly enshrines the right to bear arms and, critically, prevents local governments from regulating gun ownership.
So the laws have to be uniform statewide.
Exactly. And it is a shall-issue state for concealed carry permits, meaning applicants have a presumptive right to receive a license. This combination of highly progressive social policy and staunch protection of gun rights underscores the complexity and the deep independence of New Mexico's political identity. #tag outro.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? New Mexico is clearly not a forgotten state or a homogeneous desert. It is this intricate blend of millennia-old indigenous heritage, evidenced by the living traditions of the ancestral Puebloan and the presence of Taos Pueblo, and the communal governance of the Essequias. And this is all deeply layered with a profound Spanish-Hispano culture that fought for centuries to maintain its identity.
But simultaneously, New Mexico is defined by its cutting-edge 21st century science, from the foundational, world-altering research at Los Alamos and Sandia that ushered in the atomic age and created that unique educated class, to the commercial space launches happening today at Spaceport America. It's a place where ancient roads literally meet commercial spaceflight, a place of extreme, stark contrasts.
A place where that internal paradox we've been talking about, low rankings in education and wealth coexisting with a high concentration of PhD holders and federal power, is just inescapable.
And that paradox, combined with its unique, complicated history of being denied statehood for decades due to its majority non-Anglo population and the ongoing legacy of forced Native American reservations, raises a really important, provocative question for you to consider.
Okay.
Given New Mexico's long, conflicted path to political integration and its enduring status as a majority-minority state, how does this legacy of delayed inclusion and racial prejudice manifest in its modern political culture? A culture which, despite its national democratic leanings, remains strongly moderate and focused on individual candidate profile rather than rigid ideological purity. It suggests that the historical struggle for identity continues to inform how New Mexicans choose to be governed today, demanding representation and compromise over dogma.